When I lost my job, my husband said, "I'm not going to provide for you anymore." At 8:17 a.m., Evelyn Carter stared at the email glowing on her phone, reading the same sentence again and again until the letters blurred. Her position had been eliminated. 18 years, gone in one paragraph. She sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, hands shaking, already rehearsing how she would explain this to her husband. Mark came home that night later than usual. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't hug her. He listened while scrolling his phone, nodding once like a bored manager hearing an excuse. When she finished, he looked up and sighed. "So what's your plan?" he asked. "I'll find something," Evelyn said quickly. "It might take a little time, but—" Mark stood up, walked to the counter, and placed his keys down with care. "I'm not going to provide for you anymore." The words landed heavier than the layoff. Evelyn laughed softly, thinking it was a cruel joke. Mark didn't smile. He told her he was done carrying dead weight, done funding fear, done being married to someone who couldn't keep up. Then he said something worse. He said he'd already spoken to a lawyer. The house was his. The accounts were his. She had 72 hours to figure herself out. Evelyn felt the room tilt. This was the man she supported through his failures, his layoffs, his broken ideas. She opened her mouth to remind him of that, but Mark was already walking away. As his bedroom door closed, Evelyn noticed her phone buzz. A banking alert flashed on the screen, and her stomach dropped as she realized exactly what he had just taken from her. She didn't know this moment was only the beginning of something worse. Before the night everything collapsed, Evelyn Carter believed her marriage had survived worse. She remembered the early years clearly when Mark was the one without work, sitting on the couch with rejection emails and restless anger. For nearly 2 years, she paid the mortgage, the insurance, the groceries, and never once reminded him that she was carrying them both. She worked long hours, came home exhausted, and still listened when he complained about feeling small. She told herself this was what partnership meant. When Mark finally found stability, his pride returned fast, but his gratitude never followed. Over time, the marriage quietly shifted. Decisions became his. Money became his language of control. Evelyn noticed her name disappearing from documents she barely read, trusting him because trust was easier than conflict. Whenever she asked questions, Mark smiled and said she worried too much. What hurt most was how normal everything looked from the outside. Family dinners, weekend errands, vacations paid on credit she didn't realize was no longer shared. She believed love meant endurance, and endurance meant silence. The layoff didn't break the marriage. It revealed it. Mark didn't panic because he had already prepared for her failure. He had studied her vulnerability like a weakness to exploit. In his mind, love had terms, and she had violated them. As Evelyn replayed their past, she realized how often she had stepped back so he could feel taller. She had mistaken sacrifice for security. Now, standing alone in a house that no longer belonged to her, she understood something too late. She had never been a partner. She had been an investment Mark was ready to abandon the moment returns stopped coming. The walls felt colder each hour, and every memory echoed with new meaning, forcing her to confront how quietly she had disappeared inside a life she thought was safe, while believing loyalty alone could protect her from abandonment and ruin. And as she packed her belongings in silence, one thought refused to leave her mind. If he had planned this for so long, what else had he hidden from her? 72 hours sounds generous until every minute is counted against you. Evelyn spent the first night sitting on the floor of the guest room, surrounded by half-filled boxes, listening to Mark move freely through the house like she was already gone. By morning, the reality sharpened. Her credit card declined at the gas station. The joint account showed a zero balance. When she called the bank, the voice on the line calmly explained that the account structure had been changed months ago. She was no longer an authorized user. Evelyn drove to a legal aid office, clutching a folder of marriage documents she barely understood. The waiting room was full, tired faces, quiet desperation. After 3 hours, a volunteer attorney told her the truth without softness. The house was in Mark's name. The debt, however, was mostly in hers. She left numb, carrying a future she never agreed to. By the second night, Mark taped an eviction notice to the fridge. Not legal yet, but threatening enough. He didn't speak to her. He didn't have to. The message was clear. On the third day, Evelyn loaded her car with what fit: clothes, photos, her grandmother's ring. When she tried to take the laptop she had used for work, Mark stopped her. He said it was company property, even though the company no longer existed. She slept in her car that night, parked behind a closed grocery store, staring at the ceiling as condensation formed above her head. Every sound felt dangerous. Every passing car felt like judgment. What terrified her most wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was the realization that Mark hadn't pushed her out. He had erased her carefully, legally, and without witnesses. She wondered how someone who once promised forever could dismantle a life so efficiently, turning love into paperwork, memories into liabilities, and a shared future into a cold calculation that left no room for mercy or hesitation at all whatsoever. As dawn broke, Evelyn checked her phone and saw a notification that made her blood run cold, confirming he wasn't finished with her yet. By the fourth day, Evelyn learned how quickly isolation can destroy dignity. She called Mark's sister first, explaining everything with shaking honesty, hoping for a familiar voice. The line went quiet, then cold. Family matters should stay private, she was told. The call ended before Evelyn could answer. She tried friends next, couples they had shared dinners with, women who once said she was strong. Some didn't pick up. Others sent polite texts about being busy. One suggested Evelyn must have done something to deserve this. Shame settled deeper than hunger. At the public library, Evelyn searched job listings until her eyes burned. Most required credit checks, permanent addresses, stability she no longer possessed. She printed resumes anyway, folding them carefully like fragile promises. Each rejection email arrived faster than the last. That afternoon, another letter waited on her car windshield. A notice from a collection agency, accounts she didn't recognize, loans she never signed for. Her hands trembled as she read the amounts. Thousands of dollars, her name typed neatly at the top. Reality struck hard. Mark hadn't just abandoned her. He had positioned her as the one to blame. If she spoke up, she would look irresponsible, unstable, bitter. He knew how society judged women without money or homes. Evelyn sat in the driver's seat and cried until her chest ached. Not loud sobs, quiet ones, the kind that come when pride finally breaks. She felt invisible, like a problem everyone preferred not to see. As night approached, she realized no one was coming to rescue her. There would be no apology, no sudden kindness, no safety net. Only choices made alone, in silence, while the world kept moving. She wiped her face, started the engine, and whispered a promise to herself she wasn't sure she could keep. She would survive this, even if it meant becoming someone entirely different from the woman Mark believed he had destroyed forever. That night marked the moment her old life truly ended, and a harder, uncertain path began, one demanding courage she never knew she possessed, while hope remained painfully distant. Night fell colder than Evelyn expected. The small church parking lot was nearly empty, lights dim, shadows long. She chose a spot near the back, turned off the engine, and sat in silence, afraid to waste gas. Her phone showed 8% battery, no missed calls. She wrapped herself in a thin jacket and stared at the windshield. Condensation blurred the outside world, making everything distant, unreal. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but fear pressed harder. Every sound made her flinch, a door closing, footsteps, a siren far away. Evelyn thought about the bed she used to sleep in, the clean sheets she had folded that morning. She wondered if Mark noticed the quiet yet, or if relief had already replaced her absence. The thought stung more than the cold. Around midnight, rain began tapping softly against the roof of the car. She leaned her forehead against the steering wheel and finally let herself cry. Not for the job, not even for the marriage. She cried for the woman she used to be, the one who believed love meant safety. Her chest tightened as memories surfaced. Holidays, promises, the casual way Mark used to say, "We'll be fine." Now fine felt like a cruel joke. Hours passed slowly. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by anxiety and aching muscles. When dawn approached, pale light crept through the fogged glass. Evelyn straightened, wiped her face, and checked her phone again. A single message waited, from an unknown number, just 6 words. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Her heart dropped. She didn't know if it meant help or another blow, only that whatever came next would change everything again. She inhaled deeply, feeling both dread and a fragile spark of hope collide inside her, unaware that this message would pull her into a chain of events far larger, darker, and more transformative than the loss that brought her here tonight. It was the first hint that the darkness surrounding her also concealed a doorway she had never imagined finding alone. That realization would redefine survival, justice, and the meaning of starting over. The message led Evelyn back into the church just after sunrise. The doors were unlocked for morning volunteers, the air quiet and still. She hesitated before entering, feeling out of place, carrying exhaustion on her shoulders like weight she could not set down. Inside, only one other person sat on the last wooden bench, a gray-haired man in a worn jacket, hands folded, eyes lowered. He looked up when she approached, not startled, as if he had been expecting her. His name, he said softly, was Thomas Reed. He explained that he had seen her car in the parking lot the night before. He hadn't wanted to scare her. The message, he said, was only meant to make sure she was alive. There was no pity in his voice, no curiosity either, just concern, plain and steady. Evelyn sat beside him, keeping space between them. She didn't know why she trusted him enough to stay. Maybe it was the way he didn't ask questions. Maybe it was the way he didn't look away. Thomas told her he came to the church every morning, not for sermons, but for quiet. He said he understood what it felt like to lose everything without warning. His words were careful, like someone used to carrying heavy truths alone. When Evelyn finally spoke, the story spilled out in pieces. The layoff, the marriage, the car. She expected judgment or advice. Thomas only listened. When she finished, he nodded once and said, "You're not broken. You're just standing in the wrong chapter." He offered her a cup of coffee from the volunteer table. It was weak and lukewarm, but she held it like something sacred. For the first time in days, she felt seen without being measured. As they sat in silence, Evelyn noticed how calm she felt beside a stranger. She didn't know then that Thomas was more than a witness to her collapse. She didn't know he carried answers that could dismantle the man who destroyed her. She only knew that somehow this quiet morning marked the first moment she didn't feel completely alone anymore. And that frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. Thomas didn't offer miracles. He offered routine. That afternoon, he walked Evelyn 2 blocks from the church to a small office building that smelled of cleaning chemicals and old paper. A friend of his managed the place and needed overnight janitorial help. It wasn't charity, Thomas said. It was work. Evelyn nodded before fear could speak. The pay was modest. The hours were long. The dignity came slowly. That first night, she scrubbed floors until her hands burned, pushing a cart through empty hallways while security cameras blinked overhead. No one asked about her past. No one cared who she had been. Days blurred into nights. She slept in her car, showered at the church, and worked until exhaustion muted her thoughts. Each paycheck was small but real. She bought groceries instead of fast food. She replaced panic with planning, one list at a time. Thomas checked on her without hovering. Sometimes he left sandwiches, sometimes just a nod. He never asked for thanks. When she tried to explain how much it meant, he stopped her gently. "You'd do the same," he said. She wasn't sure she believed that yet. One evening, while emptying trash bins, Evelyn overheard 2 office workers laughing about layoffs. Something inside her flinched, then steadied. She realized she wasn't ashamed anymore. Tired, yes. Afraid sometimes, but not ashamed. Late that night, she sat in her car and reviewed her finances. For the first time, numbers didn't feel like enemies. They felt like tools. She began to imagine next steps. A room to rent, a mailing address, possibility fragile but present. What she didn't see was the envelope tucked under her windshield wiper when she returned from work. Inside were photocopied bank statements, names highlighted in yellow and one familiar signature at the bottom. Thomas had not only been watching over her, he had been watching Mark. What came next would force Evelyn to choose between fear and truth. Knowing silence would cost her everything she had rebuilt from nothing alone. By the end of the week, Evelyn understood the trap she was standing in. The envelope Thomas left behind wasn't just information, it was evidence. Offshore transfers, shell accounts, dates lining up perfectly with moments Mark claimed financial hardship. Every page carried her married name, binding her to decisions she never made. Fear returned sharper than before. If this surfaced the wrong way, Mark could paint her as an accomplice. She imagined courtrooms, headlines, strangers judging a woman already living in her car. The weight of the risk pressed against her chest until breathing felt deliberate. The next morning, Mark called. His voice was calm, almost friendly. He asked where she was staying. He said he hoped she was being reasonable. Then he mentioned lawyers again, warned her not to make trouble. The call ended with a threat disguised as concern. That afternoon, a letter arrived at the church, a formal notice claiming Evelyn had abandoned the marital home, forfeiting any remaining claims. The timing was too perfect. Mark was closing the net. Evelyn confronted Thomas, demanding to know why he involved her. For the first time, his calm cracked. He admitted Mark wasn't just cruel, he was careful. He destroyed people quietly, letting them ruin themselves while he stayed clean. Thomas had watched it happen before. "You can walk away," Thomas said, "or you can stop him." Evelyn spent that night awake, staring at the ceiling of her car, listening to rain pound metal. Walking away meant safety. Speaking up meant war. She thought of every woman Mark might leave behind after her, every erased life. By morning, she made her choice. She didn't know how to fight yet. She didn't know who would believe her. But she knew one thing with certainty. Mark had counted on her fear. And for the first time since losing everything, Evelyn decided she would not give it to him. That decision would pull her into consequences she couldn't imagine, exposing secrets, allies, and dangers waiting just beyond the fragile hope she had finally allowed herself to feel before everything changed forever completely. Mark did not wait long to strike back. He showed up at the office building one evening, pretending coincidence. He smiled at security, then looked straight at Evelyn. The fear in her stomach returned instantly. Mark spoke softly, carefully, like a man rehearsed. He warned her to stop asking questions. The next day, Evelyn lost her cleaning job without explanation. The manager avoided her eyes and apologized vaguely. Security escorted her out as if she were dangerous. Thomas wasn't surprised when she told him. This was how Mark operated. Quiet pressure, clean hands. No witnesses, no mercy. Always intentional cruelty. Rumors began spreading online under Evelyn's name. Anonymous posts accused her of theft and instability. Friends stopped replying completely. Mark had weaponized reputation. Evelyn watched her credibility dissolve in real time. Each lie isolated her further. Fear crept back into her bones, but anger followed. It felt new and focused. Thomas finally explained why he recognized Mark's name. Years earlier, he audited a firm tied to Mark. What he found ruined his career. Mark walked away untouched. Others didn't. Lives collapsed quietly. Families blamed themselves. Truth was buried, until now. Evelyn realized she was never random. She was selected, deliberately. That night, Mark sent a final message. He suggested reconciliation if she behaved. The implication sickened her. Silence for security. Obedience for protection. Evelyn deleted the message. Her hands stopped shaking. Fear loosened its grip. Resolve took its place. She chose conflict and accepted consequences fully, whatever they were, next. Together, Thomas and Evelyn began organizing evidence carefully. Dates, signatures, transaction paths. Each document told a pattern. Mark's pattern. Control, abandon, erase. Evelyn felt stronger with every page. Knowledge replaced panic. Purpose replaced despair. Still, danger lingered. Mark sensed resistance, and he hated it. That made him reckless, very reckless. Evelyn knew exposure would cost her everything again, but hiding had already destroyed her. She looked at Thomas and nodded. They would move forward, together. What they uncovered next would shock authorities and devastate Mark. But first, he would strike again. Harder than before, this time publicly, without hiding anymore. Evelyn stopped thinking in days and started thinking in steps. Survival required discipline. Every morning she woke before sunrise, washed her face in the church bathroom, and wrote plans on scrap paper. Eat, work, research, rest, repeat. Emotion became a luxury she could not afford. She applied everywhere. Warehouses, call centers, temp agencies that barely remembered her name. Rejection followed, but she learned not to pause on it. Each no hardened her focus. At night, she reviewed documents with Thomas, learning financial language she once ignored. Numbers stopped looking like threats. They became patterns. Mark escalated. He froze her remaining accounts through legal motions she couldn't contest yet. He filed claims painting her as unstable, unreliable, vindictive. Each notice felt like another shove toward the edge. Evelyn responded by documenting everything: dates, times, messages. Silence was no longer an option. Her body suffered, sleepless nights, headaches, weight loss, but something inside sharpened. She no longer asked why this was happening. She asked how to end it. That shift changed everything. One evening, while reviewing statements, Evelyn noticed a discrepancy. A transfer Mark had disguised poorly. It linked two accounts Thomas had flagged years earlier. The trail wasn't complete, but it was real. For the first time, they had leverage. Evelyn felt fear, then determination. This wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping him, about preventing future damage. She thought of the women who would come after her if she failed. Thomas warned her the next steps would be brutal. Investigators, lawyers, exposure. Mark would not surrender quietly. Evelyn listened, then surprised herself by smiling. She had already lost comfort, pride, security. What remained was truth, and she was willing to protect it. As she closed her notebook, Evelyn realized she was no longer reacting. She was preparing, and preparation meant one thing. The woman Mark tried to erase was gone. Someone stronger had taken her place. And with that understanding, she stepped forward into uncertainty, knowing every calculated move ahead would transform survival into justice, and justice into a life no one could ever steal again from her hands alone. Thomas finally told her the part he had avoided. Years ago, he was a senior forensic accountant with a spotless reputation. His job was to follow money for corporations that claimed transparency. One audit led him to Mark's network. What he found was systematic fraud disguised as efficiency. Thomas reported it internally. The response was swift and brutal. His access was revoked. His findings were buried. Within weeks, he was blamed for errors he never made. Lawsuits followed. His name became radioactive. Friends disappeared. His marriage collapsed under pressure. He lost everything except the evidence he copied in secret. He showed Evelyn a small encrypted drive. Inside were transaction maps, shell companies, and timelines spanning decades. Mark was only one beneficiary. He wasn't the mastermind, but he was ruthless. He destroyed partners before they could expose him. Thomas explained why he stayed quiet for so long. Speaking out once had cost him his life as he knew it. He survived by staying invisible, helping people quietly, watching monsters thrive, until Evelyn. "She didn't deserve you," Thomas said calmly, "and neither did the others." Evelyn felt anger burn clean and sharp. This wasn't just personal betrayal, it was a system that fed on silence, on people too tired or afraid to fight back. They planned carefully, not revenge, accountability. The evidence needed context, legal framing, protection. Thomas contacted an old colleague who still believed him, someone with nothing left to lose. As night fell, Evelyn realized the scale of what she had stepped into. Mark wasn't just her problem, he was a symptom. Exposing him would shake lives far beyond her own. Fear returned briefly, then passed, because for the first time Evelyn understood something clearly. Her suffering wasn't meaningless, it was a doorway, and once opened, it could never be closed again. That truth steadied her breathing, straightened her spine, and silenced doubt. Whatever came next, she would face it awake, not hiding. Mark had built his power on fear. Evelyn was done feeding it, and the silence he relied on was ending now for everyone he tried to erase. They moved quietly. Thomas reconnected Evelyn with people she never expected to trust again. Former analysts, an investigative journalist, a nonprofit legal group that specialized in financial abuse. Each conversation added another piece to the pattern. Different cities, different victims, same structure. Evelyn listened more than she spoke. She learned how Mark targeted competence, married stability, then rewrote reality when control slipped. The stories matched hers with chilling precision. Sudden financial shifts, legal pressure, reputation damage, isolation. One woman broke down describing how she lost custody after Mark's testimony. Another described years of debt she never created. Evelyn felt rage, but also clarity. This wasn't about saving herself anymore. The network grew cautiously. Secure emails, encrypted files, late-night calls whispered in cars and basements. Every move risked retaliation. Mark was powerful, connected, protected by plausible deniability, but cracks were forming. Then came the first real breakthrough. A former bank compliance officer confirmed irregularities Thomas flagged years earlier. This time, documentation survived. The story could no longer be dismissed as a personal dispute. Evelyn was asked to be the face, the primary complainant. The risk landed squarely on her shoulders. Once public, there would be no retreat. She spent a night alone deciding. Fear argued loudly. Survival urged caution. But something stronger answered. If she stayed silent, Mark would continue. Others would suffer. At sunrise, Evelyn sent one email. I'm in. The response came fast. Federal interest, protective measures, momentum. Mark sensed it immediately. His tone shifted from confident to aggressive. He left voicemails accusing her of betrayal, insanity, manipulation. Evelyn saved every message. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. The web Mark spun was tightening around him instead. And as the investigation officially opened, Evelyn understood the most dangerous moment was ahead. Because men like Mark don't lose quietly. They burn everything on the way down, and she was standing directly in his line of fire now. She knew the next confrontation would test her resolve, her safety, and her faith in justice. But turning back was no longer possible for her now, at the edge of truth. Mark struck publicly, exactly as Thomas warned. Within 48 hours, Evelyn's name appeared online, tied to accusations she barely recognized. Articles framed her as a disgruntled ex-wife chasing attention. Comment sections filled with cruelty, strangers dissecting her sanity with confidence. The pressure escalated fast. Investigators advised caution, but they could not stop the noise. Evelyn's car was followed twice. An unknown number sent photos of her sleeping in the parking lot. The message was clear. She was being watched. Then came the call from a former employer. A job offer she had quietly secured was withdrawn. Legal concerns, they said. Reputation risk. Evelyn thanked them politely, then sat in silence, feeling the floor tilt again. Thomas urged her to step back temporarily. Let the process work. Let others speak. But Evelyn recognized the tactic. Mark was testing limits, hoping fear would finish what lawyers started. One night, Mark appeared at the church. He stood under the streetlight, composed, familiar, dangerous. He told her this could all stop. He promised money, comfort, forgiveness. He said she was tired, confused, manipulated by a bitter old man. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. How many others? Mark's smile vanished. The next morning, Evelyn submitted her sworn statement. Names, dates, evidence. She signed it knowing retaliation would follow. And it did. A restraining order request appeared hours later, claiming harassment. Mark tried to flip the narrative completely, but this time the paper trail spoke louder. Evelyn was terrified, exhausted, bruised in ways no one could see, but she was no longer alone, and she was no longer unsure. As she left the courthouse, reporters gathered, cameras clicked, a question was shouted. She paused, turned, and said nothing. Silence, she learned, could also be a weapon, and this time it was hers. It steadied her breathing, anchored her resolve, and warned her enemies. The storm had peaked, not passed. What followed would be irreversible, public, and devastating. Mark had chosen escalation. Evelyn had chosen truth, and truth was about to answer with consequences no threat could delay any longer now. Evelyn thought she had reached the lowest point before, but she was wrong. The weeks that followed drained what little strength remained. Court dates blurred together. Interviews replayed on screens she avoided. Strangers debated her worth like entertainment. Thomas's health declined quietly. He missed meetings. His hands shook more. One evening, he admitted the truth. The stress had accelerated an existing illness. Doctors recommended rest, distance, silence. None of those were possible anymore. Guilt crushed Evelyn. She wondered if fighting had cost him the peace he built after losing everything. Thomas dismissed her apology gently. "This fight gave my life meaning again," he said. Still, fear wrapped around her chest. Money vanished again. Legal fees consumed savings. The church could only help so much. Evelyn skipped meals without noticing. She worked temporary shifts when possible, slept little, and smiled through exhaustion when cameras appeared nearby. One night, alone in her car, she finally broke. She screamed into the steering wheel, fists shaking, voice cracking. She begged the darkness to let her stop, to let her be ordinary again. Tears soaked her sleeves until there was nothing left. At dawn, she received a message from the legal team. Mark's accounts were officially frozen pending investigation. It wasn't victory, but it was proof the system was listening. Later that day, Thomas collapsed outside the church. An ambulance arrived quickly, but the damage was severe. Evelyn sat in the hospital hallway, staring at her hands, certain she had led him to this moment. A doctor approached quietly. Thomas was stable for now. Limited time, but conscious. He asked for Evelyn. When she entered the room, Thomas smiled weakly. "You're doing fine," he whispered. "Don't stop now." Evelyn held his hand and felt something shift. Despair loosened its grip. Pain remained, but purpose burned brighter. She left the hospital knowing she had crossed the deepest valley. Whatever came next would be built on loss, courage, and an unbreakable decision. She would finish this, not for revenge, but for everyone who never had the strength to stand where she now stood. And she meant it. Mark's world began collapsing quietly, the way lies always do. First came the frozen accounts, then business partners stopped returning calls. Invitations disappeared. Meetings were canceled without explanation. The confidence he wore like armor started cracking in public. News broke slowly but relentlessly. Federal investigators confirmed a widening probe. Financial institutions issued statements distancing themselves. Mark's name, once polished, now appeared beside words like fraud, coercion, and abuse. The narrative he controlled for years slipped from his hands. Privately, the consequences were worse. The woman he had been seeing moved out overnight, taking only what fit in her car. She left a note saying she couldn't risk prison for a man who would sacrifice anyone. Mark read it twice, then tore it apart. He tried to reach Evelyn. Emails, messages, voicemails filled with anger, then bargaining, then desperation. She did not respond. Her silence echoed louder than any accusation. In court, Mark's composure finally broke. Evidence stacked neatly against him. Witnesses spoke with trembling voices. Patterns emerged, undeniable and clear. The judge's expression hardened with each revelation. Outside, cameras waited. This time, they followed Mark. His face, pale and strained, told the story no statement could fix. Power had abandoned him. Meanwhile, Evelyn received news she barely allowed herself to hope for, a settlement offer acknowledging financial abuse, restitution, legal recognition of wrongdoing. It wasn't everything, but it was truth written into record. She thought of Thomas in his hospital bed, of the women who had trusted her stories, of the nights spent terrified in her car. This was the turning point they endured for. Mark was remanded for further investigation. Bail denied. As officers led him away, he searched the room for Evelyn. She was not there. She was already outside, breathing deeply, feeling something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Relief. Justice had not arrived loudly. It arrived firmly. And for the first time, Evelyn understood that the man who destroyed her life was finally facing the weight of every choice he made alone. Those consequences would follow him long after the courtroom doors closed behind him, forever unchallenged. Evelyn attended the final hearing quietly, sitting in the last row, hands folded, spine straight. She no longer needed to be seen to feel validated. The evidence spoke without her voice now. Mark entered surrounded by attorneys, but the arrogance was gone. His shoulders slumped. His eyes avoided the gallery. The judge summarized months of findings in a steady tone that allowed no room for denial. Fraud, coercion, financial abuse. Each word landed like a closed door. When the sentence was announced, the room held its breath. Mark was ordered into custody pending formal charges, assets seized, restitution mandated. It wasn't dramatic, it was final. Evelyn felt a long-held tension release from her body, like air leaving a sealed room. Outside, reporters swarmed. Microphones pushed forward, questions shouted. Evelyn walked past them all. She had already given everything she needed to give. Her story no longer belonged to strangers. She went straight to the hospital. Thomas was awake, thinner now, eyes softer. She told him the outcome simply. No triumph, no celebration, just facts. He listened, then closed his eyes. A small smile forming. "Good," he said. "Now you're free." They sat together without talking. The machines hummed quietly. Evelyn realized freedom didn't feel like joy. It felt like calm, like standing on solid ground after years of drifting. Later that evening, Evelyn returned to the church parking lot one last time. She stood beside her car, touching the hood gently, remembering the fear, the cold, the nights she doubted herself. She wasn't ashamed anymore. She was grateful she survived. A call came from the non-profit legal group. A formal role was being created. Advocate, consultant, someone who could guide others through what she had lived. Evelyn looked up at the darkening sky and accepted. The confrontation she once feared was over, not with shouting or revenge, but with truth and consequence. As she drove away, she understood this wasn't the end of her story. It was the moment it finally became hers. The road ahead felt uncertain, but for the first time, uncertainty no longer terrified her at all. Evelyn's life did not transform overnight, but the direction changed completely. She moved into a small rented studio, bare walls, borrowed furniture, quiet nights. It wasn't luxury, but it was hers, and ownership mattered more than comfort ever had before. The nonprofit role began slowly. Training sessions, case reviews, long conversations with women who spoke in whispers because fear still lived in their throats. Evelyn didn't promise miracles. She offered honesty, strategy, and presence. That alone changed everything for many of them. Word spread. Journalists requested interviews focused not on scandal, but survival. Evelyn chose carefully. She spoke when it helped others, stayed silent when it fed spectacle. Control, once stolen from her, was now deliberate and calm. Mark's sentencing date approached. She was not required to attend, but she did. Not for closure, for confirmation. When the judge finalized his punishment, Evelyn felt no joy, only a quiet certainty that consequences were real. Thomas watched from a hospital broadcast. His strength faded daily, but his mind remained clear. After the hearing, Evelyn visited him. She thanked him for believing her when no one else did. Thomas squeezed her hand and whispered that truth always needs witnesses. In the weeks that followed, restitution payments began. Not extravagant, but enough. Debts cleared, credit restored, a future rebuilt brick by brick. Each deposit felt less like money and more like dignity returned. One evening, Evelyn stood by her window watching city lights flicker on. She realized she was no longer angry, not numb, simply present. She had survived betrayal, exposure, and loss without becoming cruel. That, she understood, was the reward. Her life would never be what it was. It was better, stronger, honest, and for the first time it belonged entirely to her, shaped by truth, resilience, and a hard-earned peace no one could ever threaten again. She breathed deeply, embraced uncertainty, and stepped forward with steady courage, knowing setbacks might return, but never powerlessness, never silence, and never the fear that once defined her days, because she had already faced darkness and survived it with grace, strength, and self-trust. Thomas passed away on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning he used to like. No alarms, no urgency. Evelyn received the call while making coffee in her small studio. She didn't drop the cup. She didn't cry right away. She sat down slowly and closed her eyes. At the hospital, the room felt strangely peaceful. Sunlight touched the edge of the bed. Thomas looked smaller but calm. Evelyn held his hand and thanked him for choosing courage when silence would have been easier. She told him his kindness had saved more than one life. He did not respond, but she felt certain he heard. The funeral was simple. No grand speeches, no powerful names, just a handful of people who understood loss and truth. Evelyn spoke briefly. She did not describe his achievements. She described his integrity. The room listened. Afterward, she walked alone through the cemetery, reading names she didn't know, thinking about how many stories disappear without witnesses. Thomas had almost been one of them. Weeks later, a letter arrived from his attorney. Thomas had left her something. Not money, though there was some. What mattered more was responsibility. He named her steward of his archive files, his research, his unfinished work. He trusted her to protect it. Evelyn felt the weight of that gift deeply. This wasn't inheritance, it was continuation. That night, she organized the files carefully, labeling everything with steady hands. She understood now that justice is not a moment. It is maintenance. It requires people willing to remember. Thomas was gone, but his presence remained everywhere. In the women she helped, in the systems now under scrutiny, in her own refusal to look away. As she turned off the light, Evelyn whispered goodbye without sadness. Loss no longer meant emptiness. It meant legacy. And she was ready to carry it forward, not as burden, but as proof that one quiet act of decency can outlive cruelty, fear, and power, leaving behind a path others can follow without shame, silence, or regret. Tomorrow would honor him through action, not memory alone. Always forward. Evelyn's new life settled into something steady, not dramatic, but deeply satisfying. She moved into a modest house on the edge of town, nothing extravagant, just clean rooms, sunlight, and a front door that locked because she chose it. The deed carried only her name, a detail that still made her pause sometimes. Her work expanded. The nonprofit grew into a respected resource, and Evelyn became one of its strongest voices. She trained advocates, reviewed cases, and sat with women during court hearings when their knees shook too badly to stand alone. She never spoke over them. She stood beside them. Financially, things improved slowly and honestly. Restitution payments ended the debt that once strangled her future. Her credit recovered. Savings returned. Each milestone felt earned, not given. Security no longer meant dependence. It meant options. Mark's sentence was finalized quietly months later. No appeals, no dramatic speeches. Prison walls replaced boardrooms. His name faded from influence, remembered only in warnings. Evelyn did not celebrate. She acknowledged the balance restored and moved on. Some nights, memories surfaced, the betrayal, the car, the fear. But they no longer controlled her. They reminded her of distance traveled, strength gained. On the anniversary of her layoff, Evelyn planted a small tree in her yard. She pressed soil around the roots and smiled at the symbolism without embarrassment. Growth required disruption. Survival required patience. As she watered the leaves, she realized she had received everything she truly deserved: safety, purpose, respect, a future shaped by her own decisions. She went inside, closed the door, and rested easily, knowing her life was no longer defined by what was taken from her, but by what she rebuilt with courage, truth, and quiet determination, piece by piece into something lasting and entirely her own. Its quiet stability felt richer than any past comfort because it was built without permission, fear, or compromise, proving that a woman abandoned at her lowest can rise, rebuild, and claim a life defined not by loss, but by earned peace and unbreakable self-respect through resilience, patience, truth, courage, time, and growth. Years later, Evelyn sometimes thought about how close she had come to disappearing. Not dying, but fading, becoming a cautionary story no one remembered clearly. That thought no longer frightened her. It reminded her why she chose to stay visible. Her life was not perfect. Some mornings carried old echoes, some nights arrived quietly heavy, but fear no longer dictated her choices. She trusted herself now. That trust had been earned through loss, not luck. At community meetings, Evelyn spoke plainly. She told people survival was not heroic. It was stubborn. It was waking up when quitting felt easier. She watched faces soften when they realized strength could look ordinary. Letters arrived often. Women wrote from places she once slept in: cars, shelters, spare rooms. They thanked her for saying what they could not. Evelyn answered when she could, knowing words mattered most when someone felt unseen. On one such evening, she sat on her porch as the sun dropped low, coloring the street gold. The house was quiet, safe, hers. She breathed deeply, appreciating stillness without waiting for it to vanish. Mark's name surfaced occasionally in news summaries, always smaller, always diminished. It no longer stirred emotion. Consequences had completed their work. Justice had not restored the past, but it had protected the future. Evelyn smiled at that truth. Life had not rewarded her with riches or romance. It had given her something better: agency, dignity, peace. She locked her door, turned off the lights, and went to bed without rehearsing fear. Tomorrow would bring its own demands, but she would meet them standing. Because the woman who once slept in her car believing she was nothing had learned the most important lesson of all. She was never disposable. She was simply becoming. And in that becoming, she found meaning beyond survival, choosing kindness without sacrifice, courage without noise, and hope without illusion, knowing her story would quietly travel farther than pain, reaching others at the edge, reminding them that endings can be beginnings when truth is honored and self-worth finally reclaimed by those brave enough to believe.